Journalist at The Guardian, Mark Townsend, recently wrote, "A network of more than 24 conspiracy theorists, frequently backed by a coordinated Russian campaign, sent thousands of disinformation tweets to distort the reality of the Syrian conflict and deter intervention by the international community," new analysis reveals. In this piece, he identifies a journalist at the Grayzone, Aaron Maté, as the most prolific spreader of disinformation among the 28 conspiracy theorists identified, according to data collected from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue.
Maté responded to the piece, writing on Twitter that Townsend failed to contact him, offered an example of Maté's alleged disinformation, and disclosed that ISD is funded by US, UK, and allied states. For the record, we did try to reach out to Townsend via The Guardian, who said he is on leave and unable to comment or participate. But if there's any update on that, we will, of course, disclose any response we receive in the description of this video.
Co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast and host of the Katie Halper Show, Katie Halper herself, is here with us to discuss. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
All right, so what is the claim here? That Aaron Maté is at the root of some of the worst disinformation spreading that's happening on the internet. How does Maté respond?
Well, first, I should disclose, because I do believe in journalistic ethics, that Aaron Maté is my co-host of the show Useful Idiots. I want to do that because hopefully this can be a teachable moment for Mark Townsend, and I appreciate that you tried to contact him. That could also be a teachable moment for Mark Townsend, because one of the things, as Aaron points out, one of the things that Townsend failed to do was contact Aaron, and that's just basic journalism 101. When you write a piece about someone, you ask that person for a comment. Now, what's funny is that Townsend seems to know this, and in fact, his pinned tweet is a complaint that the British Home Office didn't contact him before tweeting something. So his pinned tweet says, "The Home Office never contacted me before sending this outrageous tweet." So he's mad that someone tweeted about him without getting a comment from him. Yet he writes an entire article about people, including Aaron Maté, doesn't ask them for comment. So again, I would just ask that The Guardian send him to some boot camp for journalism. Here's some other stuff that he doesn't do, which is he doesn't reveal, as Aaron points out, what the international, let's see, I have it right here, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, what they do, who funds them. And as Maté points out, they're funded by not only the British government and the US government and entities including the National Democratic Institute, International Republican Institute, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, right? So none of that is relevant, apparently. But he also doesn't provide a single example of any disinformation released by these people, by Maté. And lest you have any doubts about what a hit piece this is and a libelous hit piece it is, you should know that it was so dishonest that literally from the get-go, it was based on a lie, because the initial headline had to be corrected. The initial headline read, "Russia-backed network of Syria conspiracy theorists identified." And sadly, they couldn't prove that, so they went with the slightly less overtly libelous headline of "Network of Syria conspiracy theorists identified." But the fact that the headline was published in the first place, that there was no editorial standard that said maybe you should prove something before you put it in a headline, just speaks to the low standards to which the Guardian holds itself. And it's pretty pathetic. I mean, this is not the type of journalism we should be expecting from the Guardian, which used to be quite esteemed.
Yeah, I've noticed that people who are obsessed with misinformation, and by people I mean sort of policy experts, some government officials, and a lot of journalists who consider misinformation, disinformation, malinformation their beat, can take it so far that they end up kind of sounding like the very people the category of people they think they're criticizing. Like, they often sound like conspiracy theorists themselves, like they're drawing on some whiteboard the elaborate connections between Russia and these people and et cetera. And it's actually like they're the crazy ones when they take it to that level. And I think this is probably an example of that, and should make us a little bit more skeptical of this entire kind of misinformation industry is the wrong word, but the type of reporting or conversation that has become really key, I guess, since Trump's win in 2016, or like that was the explanation for it. Well, it was only possible that he won because of this elaborate, conspiratorial thing, a literal conspiracy that took place to confuse people and trick people into getting him elected.
Right, and I think people use these buzzwords and these boogeyman concepts about misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theorists, and what that lets them do is basically smear people without any evidence. Like, it almost works on people's reptilian brains. We just hear these words and, oh, wow, this person must be a conspiracy theorist. They're spreading disinformation, misinformation. Now, anyone responsible who wants to spread information as opposed to conspiracy theories would, of course, provide some evidence of this, but they don't have to. All they do is smear, and that's because they can't engage in any substantive critique of Aaron's work. And Aaron has done, unfortunately for these people, he's done very good work. He published at The Nation magazine, he published about this whole scandal, this cover-up, OPCW, which is the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. There is a cover-up scandal where whistleblowers leaked documents showing that their work was basically misrepresented. And again, if you have any interest in the truth, you'd want to see these documents and you'd want to see an investigation into this. You'd want to see reporting on this. But no, they just have to kill the messenger.
Yeah, could we actually get into that a little bit? Because I think that we should talk about what claims are being made. Because I think a lot of passersby who are casually looking at this conversation do see stories from credible sources or reporters that they respect for their coverage of other kinds of events say, Aaron Maté is doing a misinformation. So many people on the left are accused of being Assad apologists or things of that nature. And for those who don't have the time or interest in following the stories, it is very easy just to, go by those kinds of accusations. So can you talk a little bit about Aaron's reporting in The Nation and why it rankled so many people?
Right. Well, I think it upset so many people because it was so fact-based. And again, it was just based on documents that were leaked. So this is not based on it's not based on opinion. It's not based on hot takes. What happened was that there are whistleblowers at the OPCW who said that their work was misrepresented. Now, what their work did was it cast doubt on the claim that the Syrian government was behind use of chemical weapons in a certain event. Now, again, you can disagree if you want to. I mean, I think you can disagree with what's up for debate are the findings of the report. What's not up for debate is whether or not the report matched the initial report. That's not up for debate. We know that the report that was changed so that it did not cast doubt on that claim. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel as though the Russian stuff we're all very familiar with, how that gets kind of weaponized to undermine the credibility of your political opponents. The Syria stuff is another version of that, another shade of that. And I wonder how you deal with that. I mean, obviously, on some level, you take a tongue-in-cheek approach. You named your show Useful Idiots and kind of embrace the idea that that's the accusation you're going to get. I similarly do the same thing with Bad Faith Podcast.
Yeah.
But it has to be frustrating on a certain level. I mean, what percentage is it, kind of glib, evasion, dismissal, and what percent do you actually try to engage people on the merits? Do you find yourself being successful in explaining to people the nuances here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Syria is much more Aaron Maté's beat than it is mine. But of course, we've had people on to talk about this. But part of the problem is that people are afraid to talk about this precisely because they get smeared with baseless accusations. And Maté you guys should have him on to talk about this. But basically, again, he's an Izzy Award-winning journalist. He testified at the UN about these documents, and the UN doesn't exactly have low standards, I don't think, for who they allow to testify. Also, what's fascinating though is that I don't know why these people have such short memories. This is like the Iraq War again, basically, except we're not currently invading Syria, although we're occupying some parts of it. And as Donald Trump laid out very clearly, that was because we wanted their oil. But what's fascinating is that, remember, there was an OPCW cover-up scandal during the Iraq War. And Jose Bustani, who is the head of the OPCW, was forced out of his position thanks to Michael Bolton. They bullied him. They tried to force him to resign. When he didn't resign, they removed him. And he, once again, actually, is sounding the alarm bell, saying you should be looking at the OPCW leaked reports. You should be looking at these documents. There's no reason not to. So we see a repeat. And the truth is, I rewrote the headline, the opening of this article is a network of more than 24 conspiracy theorists, frequently backed by a coordinated Russian campaign, sent thousands of disinformation tweets to distort the reality of the Syrian conflict and deter intervention by the international community. But here's my sentence about this article, which is a network of conspiracy theorists frequently backed by a coordinated campaign sent thousands of disinformation tweets and wrote articles to distort the reality of the Syrian conflict and prompt intervention by the international community. Because if they're framing this as some kind of political, ideological warfare, then they should cop to what they're doing, which is that they're trying to make intervention a more palatable thing. They're trying to prepare people, make them war ready, as we constantly see this kind of basically press release journalism that places like The Guardian are engaging in. And again, anyone can read the documents, and that's precisely why they have to smear. Because leaked documents don't lie. Like a trove of documents don't lie. And sadly, they don't lend itself to their belligerent narrative and agenda.
It's a genuine disagreement on policy, but they portray, if you have a different view of the policy, if you don't want intervention, then they say, right, well, you're part of a coordinated campaign to mastermind disinformation. They go full hysteria on it. So it's just
and
just
they're
ridiculous.
supposed to be, and they claim to be the arbiters of truth, just calling balls and strikes. But just the fact that they have to resort to these libelous smears shows you precisely how they're unable to engage in any issues, and they have to again smear because they have no substantive critiques of Maté's reporting.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us. Katie Halper of Useful Idiots podcast, and we have a Bad Faith podcast. What should my my podcast that just associates my criticism?
Bad idiot.
What's that?
Bad idiot.
That's the crossover.
The literal fascism podcast. That's what I'm told I am. So, thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.